Hi there. So it seems like apparently OBS is a little slow for me today, or my internet. I don't really know which. Welcome to this week's Tanzu Tuesdays. You may see that says .net. That's because that was happening earlier. If you came there for that, I'm sorry. This is a different show. So as usual, I have Lee and Whitney as my lovely co-hosts.
What's up, friends?
Hello. Tiffany, I'm loving your robe. You got like a real rapper vibe.
Super plush.
Yeah.
Yeah, like
The
a couple
of
years
Tanzu.
ago, there's no way that I would I would have been like, all right, I had to change. I'm going on the stream, but you know what? I want other people to feel comfortable doing this at home too.
I think that's part of
It's better at
streaming,
home.
is your genuine self, right? Just showing, yeah. So you're doing it.
My
You're
genuine home self is the bum life.
It's elevated bum life. I mean, you're soaring over the Seattle sky, right?
Yeah. Especially with COVID vibes and it coming back, kind of like it's very rare that I put on, I have stretch pants on all the time. Like I haven't worn pants that have a zipper front in a really long time. Because
I only do that when I leave the house, and that's because it's cold enough that other pants don't work.
Yeah, sweats are super comfy. That's definitely the way to go, isn't it?
Yeah.
All right, and then our guest I'm super stoked for today. You might know him as V Rabbi coming in, Scott Rosenberg. Scott, where are you joining us from?
Welcome.
Hey everyone, joining from Israel. How are you guys?
Super good.
Thanks for joining us for far away and for staying up so late, isn't it?
Yeah, what time is it there?
10 o'clock.
Yeah. Wait,
I just wonder if we need an EU time slot. We always have so many awesome guests coming from the other side of the ocean here.
We really
to
do.
think the show used to be at 1 p.m. and I was like, we need to scoot this an hour earlier.
Oh yeah. If Tiffany says it should be earlier, it really must need to be earlier.
I just felt so it's still not that much, but I still felt so guilty whenever we'd have people from later times, really late time zones, and I'm like, well, thank you so much, but I'm sorry.
Scott, I'm also loving all your swag right now. I like your
Tanzu Community Edition and my Kubernetes shirt.
Is that just for us, or is that just what you wear every day?
No, it just happens to be what I put on today.
Nice.
I'm kind of a super user,
Yesterday I wore my Octant shirt. Exactly.
Bringing Kubernetes to a graphical user interface near you. Right?
Love it.
Hopping in and out of VS Code. Got my kubectl commands. I'm in there in the YAML editor, octanting my CRDs.
I definitely had a double take. I think it's because I have this bird that I definitely thought you said poop cuddle, and I was just like, what?
Did you say poop cuddle?
That's what I thought you said. I was like, no, he didn't say that. It's because I'm constantly cleaning up poop.
It's like a fiber supplement or something.
That's what I need to use for my next crappy demo. Right? Scott, what are you going to be showing us today?
So we're going to go over a bunch of just customizations and cool things with how to leverage Tanzu Community Edition, in some interesting ways and how to customize it for our environments. Some really cool things and cluster API, and mostly using the Carvel tool set to power that all.
Yeah, that's super important because, a lot of people are using Kubernetes these days, and you're not just using one cluster a lot of times, right? It's the cluster is not really for that multi-region boundary, right? So already with that problem, you got multiple clusters, you got to customize even just amongst your own stuff, right?
Exactly. And it's also with the idea of cluster API, it's great to be able to offer self-service, but a lot of times we want to make sure that certain things are installed by default in every cluster, or things like that, where
so make it cluster types that people can just be like, hey, I want one of those. Right?
Exactly. Or hey, I want Prometheus and Grafana installed in my cluster when it's installed, not afterwards need to go and install everything. How do we
exactly
security tools that we need install in every cluster?
Things like maybe like OPA or Pinniped and stuff like that, right? You know,
in my case,
Gatekeeper.
Kyverno, because I'm a bigger fan of Kyverno than Gatekeeper, but yeah.
Oh yeah, totally. You know, probably the authoring of those policies, right? It's the easier part.
Well, I just tried to learn Rego and still am trying. So
You're just not a
For YAML.
regular guy, you know?
exactly.
All right, I've reached my pun quota for the day. Seems like we got some people joining in from Spain in the chat today. KubeCon EU coming up in May. It's gonna be in Valencia.
I hope
Also,
it actually happens. That'd be great.
Pivotal John just wants to point out the obvious, which is that Scott doesn't sleep. So, is it true or not? Maybe you'll find out in the next episode.
I sleep about 3 or 4 hours a day.
Wait, what?
Oh.
You heard
How
it
do
here,
you
folks.
function?
Got a daily quota. You know, averages
I
out.
function on whiskey and Kubernetes.
And hype. Kubernetes cloud native hype. That's what it is.
Exactly. I catch up on sleeping over the weekend, which is 1 day in Israel, not 2.
Really?
Oh,
Tell me more
Yep.
about that. Yeah.
We work on Sunday.
Yeah.
Friday is half a day, so it's really a day and a half, but yeah. So day and a half weekend, no Sundays here.
Huh.
Probably the hardest thing about moving to Israel from the US, 10 years or what is it already, 15 years ago when we moved here was losing Sunday.
Yeah, I bet. And I just saw UK is doing a pilot, having some companies try out a 4-day work week. That's
Right.
Really?
Yeah, this has been making the rounds a little bit.
yeah.
Definitely interested. Yeah, it's like in the UK, right?
Mhm.
They're going to be having a couple of different companies like kind of trial it out, you know, and then
Yep.
do a study and see how things work. They're going to pay people the same.
did they
No,
say
but
how
for
many hours
80%.
they expect? Is it still like
Yeah,
does that mean
100
fewer hours?
100% of the
or-
pay, 80% of the time. So yeah, we'll
I
see
could
how that
totally
works out.
have 3-day weekends. That would be spectacular.
Yeah, well,
That
I think
definitely would be great.
yeah, I'd be vibing on my Fridays off. I know somebody who is a spacecraft engineer, and she works I think she works like the 980 schedule.
Hmm.
Oh no, or is it? It's 880. Yeah, so it's just like the 410s.
What's that mean?
No, four 10-hour work days. I know someone else who works in 980, which is that they get like every other Friday off
Okay.
as well. And it's like, yeah, to have those long weekends just built into your life regularly, it gives you more time to obviously install your own Tanzu Kubernetes, community edition clusters and customize them with Carvel's YTT toolset. What else would you be doing on a Friday?
Exactly.
So Scott, you have a GitHub repo for all this, yeah?
I do, yeah. I've actually put up everything that we'll be talking about in much more. I put up onto GitHub just about an hour ago so that everyone can play around with it.
Very timely live demo published date, right? It's like you're always kind of just working towards the demo time and you're like, all right, I got to cut it off here. We're doing a Git push.
Exactly. At some point, it's like, yeah, I guess I should just upload this so that I could always just iterate and add more. So
Before we started here, we asked Scott how long his presentation will be, and he said somewhere between 20 minutes and 7 hours. So
exactly,
it's gonna be great. Yeah.
As mentioned, I don't sleep. So my next thing is in 7 hours.
We'll do our best not to keep you that long. It might be hard.
Exactly.
All right. Well, I think we've answered far long enough. Why don't we jump into something? What do you want to show off first, Scott?
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. So basically, I am not a slide person, which is why I created 3 slides. Hello and demo time. Yeah, that's it for slides for today. in general, I think we're just going to go through a few of these different capabilities and really, where the ideas came from. A lot of this came from work that we were doing with TKGM, with Tanzu Kubernetes Grid, and then ported over to Tanzu Community Edition, and a bunch of editions as well. And actually, one of the cool things here is that actually the machine that I'm working on here, this TCE admin VM, is a project that we've worked on internally here, where we built a jump box, basically automation using Packer and Ansible that creates a Kubernetes jump box. And it has flavors for EKS Anywhere, for TKG, and for TCE currently. And it basically comes pre-installed as an OVA that we upload to an S3 bucket so anyone can pull down, and has all of the kubectl auto completion. Tanzu CLI is installed, as well as a bunch of other like kubectl plugins, Octant, different tools that just help out. So I just brought this machine before the demo, and it's really awesome. I'll share the link to that later.
Cool. You're running this machine on a vSphere cluster?
Yeah. So this is just
so you just have this
a
OVA,
standard OVA.
and you just got like
an OVA with
TCE flavor.
With input parameters for like PivNet credentials and my VMware credentials, TMC API tokens. And if you give those in, it also automatically authenticates you with the relevant CLIs to those systems as well, in order to really just give you a great jump box. And there's
you built this with
to upgrade.
Packer and Ansible.
Packer and Ansible, exactly.
Wow.
So that's everything that we have here, where basically if we just went into the Ansible,
and by it's internally working on this internally, you mean with TerraSky, right?
Yeah, exactly. So this is one of my colleagues, Itai, and myself put this together. He really did amazing work here with the Ansible. We're setting up all of the Carvel tool set, setting up like GoVC, different HashiCorp tools on here as well. Different kubectl plugins. I'm just a full, CLIs, a full machine that we use this when we go to customers, because it's so much easier to just have all the tools that we need instead of, hey, can you download this? And well, this you need to download with Go, and this you need to download with Brew, and this needs a make install, and this needs to be with apt, and this needs this way. Just
all of the package managers, everything, all of them.
Exactly.
Yeah. And all of the credentials, that you need to be a vSphere admin and a cluster admin of Kubernetes, and an AWS admin and an Azure admin, right?
Exactly.
So you pull all those things into one jump box. Is this a jump box source code buildable or available or downloadable somehow? Or is this just kind of like a...
It will be.
It
will be shortly. It's not yet, but I'd say in a matter of weeks, it'll be probably a week or two. It'll be up on GitHub as well. We're just cleaning it up, making sure that we aren't leaking any problematic things in there, because this was an internal project. And then
as that happens when you build stuff with your friends at your company, right? So.
Exactly. You always find some SSH keys or credentials or something leaked in there. So we're going through all of this, and then we'll upload that. But that's really just like a cool thing that we've done that's really great for TCE, especially because like TKG is a bit different. There's some proprietary CLIs. There's some stuff there, but TCE is completely open source, so it's great to be able to build this out in the open as well.
Yeah, I think it's cool that you mentioned how a lot of the work you've been putting together on customizing TCE, which is what you're talking about right now, Tanzu Community Edition, the open source distro, actually kind of comes from a history of customizing Tanzu Kubernetes Grid, right? The stuff that people often pay enterprise contracts for. And I think it's probably been said on Tanzu TV before, but if you don't know about Tanzu Community Edition, we launched it last October, VMware did. And a bunch of people were super involved, including people like Scott. And Tanzu Community Edition is now considered kind of the upstream in a way of Tanzu Kubernetes Grid. So the stuff that you could pay for with VMware kind of comes now from a more fast, like quickly released version. That's upstream from the paid stuff. So all that.
Upstream.
Oh. Tiffany's hopping in here.
Okay. Issues with me. Well, like it's not just like the upstream of Tanzu Kubernetes grid. It's Tanzu, which includes Tanzu Kubernetes grid. It's like
Exactly.
the whole like portfolio to an extent, and commercial. It's commercial versus like open source, basically.
Yeah, you're using a bunch
community.
of the Carvel tool set, that's just becoming more mature and getting developed inside of Community Edition with the packages. So
Yeah,
super
exactly.
excited. So we're on the jump box then.
Exactly. So we're on this jump box, which, whatever we deployed earlier today. And really, it's kind of split out into, three general ideas where one of the things that we've realized when it comes to Tanzu Community Edition is that there are certain things that actually just need a good bash script to do. When we're creating multiple clusters, it's simple things like getting all of the kube configs for your clusters in Tanzu Community Edition in a single command. There's three types of kube configs that you could get with Tanzu Community Edition. You could get an admin one, you could get a pinniped one, you could get pinniped without a browser for when running on the jump box. It's a lot of commands to run. And when we talk about a grid of clusters or Tanzu Kubernetes Edition as well, we're talking about multiple clusters being created. So it's just these small scripts. And my favorite one actually is I don't deploy clusters directly. I use Terraform. So I actually have a script here that uses a project called tfkates that actually uses the Kubernetes provider, and it will run in dry run the Tanzu CLI and convert the cluster manifests into Terraform configurations. So you could actually deploy a Tanzu cluster using Terraform instead of just plain Kubernetes YAML, which is great for GitOps approaches and things like that as well for deploying our clusters. So this is just a bunch of different CLIs that have been really helpful. And I think the most helpful has been this get package default values. And we'll get into why that's really helpful soon. But when we install packages in a TCE cluster, we got to pull out those default values somehow so we can build our values file. And it's currently not the best or the easiest thing to do to pull out those values. So this just gives another way of doing it and actually takes from the package metadata, builds that default values file for you so you can start iterating over that in a really cool way. But then comes actually Carvel. And this is where actually not the Carvel packages, but the TC customizations. And I'd say that one of the biggest things that we have seen wanted to be done by most of our customers is that we want certain software to be installed on every cluster that we have. If you look at it in EKS, you have the EKS add-ons or whatnot, but I may want Kyverno installed in every one of my clusters with, for example, policies, default policies. Or I may want RBAC configuration set up, right? We have a great integration in Tanzu Community Edition with Pinniped. But one of the difficulties is that you need to deploy the cluster, then pull out the admin kube config, connect to the cluster. And then once I'm connected to the cluster, I can then create the role bindings, then generate the kube config for the Active Directory user or OIDC user, and then I can actually start working. So what we've actually done here, just as an example, is if you just apply these two files to your cluster, every cluster that gets created will automatically have cluster role bindings. If we look at this default RBAC config for a second, this is a config map that has within it cluster role bindings. That's all, role bindings, cluster role bindings, where we're setting the names of our Active Directory groups, TC admins, monitoring team, giving them the cluster roles. You could add any manifest you wanted into here. But the reason that this all works is using actually a cluster API convention called a cluster resource set. And what this is a core object. And because Tanzu Kubernetes Edition, Tanzu Community Edition is based off of cluster API, we can leverage all these strong capabilities. And what a cluster resource set basically is it allows me to say these manifests saved in a secret or in a config map, any cluster that matches labels, specific labels, apply those manifests to it. So I could save anything in a secret or a config map. And then basically we see here, I've set a cluster selector of match expression, TKG Tanzu VMware com cluster name exists. That's a label that Tanzu puts on all of our clusters. And if we match that selection, which we do in TCE, then it's going to apply any manifest that is located within this config map. So this allows us in a really easy way just to automatically, I deploy a cluster, I have my RBAC configured. I never even need to really pull out that admin kube config. I just connect with a user who's in the TCE admins group in my Active Directory domain, and I'm good. I just need to pull out the pinniped kube config. So that's just like a small example of these tiny little customizations that we can do that really make things much stronger. But it actually gets even more than that, because one of the things that's happening right now in Community Edition is that, you know, Community Edition is really split in between two repositories. We have the Tanzu framework, which is the core, and then the distribution itself. And certain things, because of how that was done, we're still kind of limited by what exists in the commercial offering, and can't really make all the changes that we want in Community Edition. So the biggest example of that has come up many times in the Slack channel, including today for Community Edition, was, you know, the package repository for installing all the different community packages in TCE is not installed by default in our clusters. This hopefully is going to change in the near future, but using that same mechanism of a cluster resource set, automatically with just applying this single YAML into my cluster, any cluster that gets created from now on will have the package repository automatically installed for them. So immediately they create a cluster, they could install Prometheus, Grafana, Multis, or Cert Manager, whatever it ends up that they want to use from the Community Edition repository. And this, I think, is just a really strong capability, because all you need to do is know how to add 4 spaces at the beginning of a YAML, of every line of a YAML, because it's inside of a config map, or just do it imperatively using the CLI and create a tiny little piece of a cluster resource set. And anything you want to apply, you can do this way. And I think that's really where the strength comes in, just the simplicity of this solution that we're using a lot. But, you know, that's all these fleet wide, right? So all of my clusters automatically have Starboard and Kyverno and Gadget and the TCE package repository and RBAC config all installed by default. But there's also a bunch of other things that a lot of times we're going to want to do in our clusters. And one of the main things there is actually things about changing how our clusters actually look, not the default configuration of Tanzu. That could be things like, I want to use Cilium as my CNI, or I want to use a newer version of Antria, so I can use the Antria and NSXT integration, or I want to use a different version of Calico, whatever it ends up being in that CNI world. Or it could also be things, for example, like, let's go here to the cluster config changes. It could be things like pushing in a custom CA into our clusters so that it trusts our private CAs internally. Supporting IPVS mode for kube proxy. That's a huge thing that we've gotten from a lot of our customers in the past, and people that I've talked to is, you know, in the end, IP tables does not scale well. And when you're dealing with large clusters, IP tables is a pain. So IPVS mode for kube proxy is great. But we don't have a way to do that in Tanzu by default, nor do we have a way to do it by default in Cluster API. But if we actually went into the IPVS folder, we're actually utilizing all the capabilities of Cluster API here in order to set this. So what's really strong here is this is all just YTT magic. There's nothing really, you know, complex here. But what we're doing basically is we added just another data variable that someone would put in their cluster saying, hi, enable IPVS. That's just, if you set it to true in your cluster, IPVS mode will be set for kube proxy. And basically what we're doing is we looked at a Tanzu Kubernetes cluster and went back at what resources actually build up that cluster. And the configuration of Kubernetes is done through an object called a kubeadm config template that has this object called pre-kubeadm commands, what to run before kubeadm runs the bootstrapping of that node. And we can just run commands here. So we're adding modprob commands and adding things into etc modules to actually enable IPVS. And then all we're doing is we're doing the same thing for our control plane. And then you see here, the first command is running this generate kube proxy.sh. And this is the hack. It's very hacky. But basically what we're doing is for every file in run/kubeadm, which is where Tanzu or Cluster API puts the kubeadm config spec before it runs the command. We find the file for kubeadm there, and we just append to the end to it another section saying, hi, please use IPVS mode. And then Cluster API doesn't know any better. It runs the kubeadm command, and this is also part of the configuration. And we have IPVS mode in Tanzu Community Edition. And this type of hack is, again, we're just utilizing standard capabilities within Cluster API, but because we're using YTT here, it becomes really easy to manipulate things and to enable IPVS or not with a single variable that someone puts in their cluster, because everything here is just in a single if of enable IPVS, true or false. That's all they said. And by default, it's false because we don't want to change that. But if all of your clusters need to be IPVS, you could put these files in the relevant folder as explained in the README folder here. You just need to put them into this specific path on your machine and change the default value to true. And every cluster will be created from that point on with IPVS without even changing our cluster manifests. So that's like a really strong capability. All of my clusters run with IPVS. That's been changed a long time ago. But another really cool one is like this idea of max pods. Of how do I actually see the max pods, not cat. And this is something that had actually come up as I'm working on Cluster API vSphere. And in the upstream community, which is really the backing technology for a lot of Tanzu Community Edition, is this idea that we want to set how many pods can run per core. For a lot of performance reasons, there are best practices from vendors out there of how many pods should run on a specific number of CPUs or numbers of cores. And that's also a capability that we can actually add using YTT. So again, here, all we're doing is saying if someone sets the value of control plane max pods per core, then we're just adding in these values for kubelet to actually configure this. And the way that it's actually configured is that you need to give it the max pods, which is actually the max pods per core times the number of CPUs. But I don't want someone to need to actually configure that. To say, okay, hold on, I'm deploying this machine with 8 CPUs and I need up to 30. So what's 30 times 8? And so instead, because we're using YTT, which is using Starlark, which is really a programming language within here, we have this ability just to do, hey, take this value that someone gave me and just multiply that by this value that also exists there and not require the user to actually go with all of these additional calculations. So really easy ways just to configure this for us.
That is a really cool abstraction that you're able to kind of set that per node number, but with more of like a core count type ideology, right? Like you've built this abstraction on top of what the configs give you because you have the programming language of YTT available to like build something around that.
Exactly. So we can abstract it all. And that's what's fun. That's what's great here. It's just this idea of abstraction. And that's why I love YTT, right? There are great tools out there for YAML templating or for Kubernetes manifest templating. But they usually are great in one of the multiple facets of YAML templating. And I'd say YTT, from my experience, is probably the steepest learning curve in terms of getting into one of these YAML templating tools. But once you get used to it, it becomes really easy to actually play around with. The community and the maintainers are amazing and really helpful as well. But it's just the most powerful.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. If you allow me to add some color, because it's I think that the learning curve with YTT is like, it's very much okay, like I can kind of see these examples, but like what the heck do I do with it? And part of the reason why I think maybe the examples aren't so much helping people in a particular direction, like here's how you template your app with values, or this is how you customize this config file for GitHub Actions, is because it can work with YAML. It's not a Kubernetes specific tool, right? It's like a JSONette in a way, except more YAMLified. And
exactly,
you can use YTT on anything. And because of its generic ability to work with stuff, you are no longer kind of concerned with Kubernetes API machinery specific things like strategic merge patches and merge keys, or like worried about whether or not you have a particular group versioning kind, or if you're matching in a namespace, and kind of some of the stuff that maybe in a more opinionated tool like Customize might let you patch things without specifying that many details. YTT gives you the full freedom to decide to patch one object or no object, or however many objects you want, and you can kind of like create structs from strings and recompile them back into YAML, and all kinds of really creative things that you end up needing to do when you are a real life cluster operator writing bash scripts and putting together, weird integrations between Terraform, like all of that stuff, right? GitHub Actions, Packer, you name it. Ansible's all YAML.
Exactly. I actually use this for VRA. For cloud templates, for blueprints and vRealize automation, I use YTT to generate those blueprints for me. So yeah, it's a lot of fun to use. And it's great that it's not locked in, right? The idea of Carvel, which is so amazing, the tools that exist, but really having these different tools that every one isn't dependent on the other either. I have YTT. I have CAP. CAP is only for Kubernetes, but CAP doesn't care if I used YTT before, or I did a Helm template before, or wrote raw YAML on my own, or used Customize before that. It doesn't care. It just give me YAML and I'll apply it in a very smart way. And all of these tools just aren't dependent on one another, but they integrate great. And that's really the strength, I think. Yeah. But so like this was just an example that had come up in an issue that someone had asked on the community, on the open source cluster API vSphere. How do I limit the amount of pods? And I just went onto the kubelet, into the kubeadm documentation, saw what you could set for kubelet extra args, and then just wrote this YTT template. I told him what he could set, and then I also just created a YTT template so that I had that in TCE as well. Which was just fun to do. I think that was some like Thursday night at 11 p.m. or something like that I was bored. And another big one that we had is setting actually NTP, because NTP, as we know in Kubernetes, is the most important thing. Nothing is as important as times when it comes to Kubernetes, because the amount of certificates. And one of the difficulties that we've seen is a lot of DHCP servers out there by default do not share the NTP server. That could be NSXV, that could be NSXT, that could be all different DHCP configurations that aren't sharing that out. So we have this simple capability that we've added of just someone can give an array of NTP servers in their cluster config and automatically will basically split that out and add those into all of your nodes hard-coded. If your DHCP servers won't do that, you can still use Tanzu Community Edition and your things won't break, because otherwise certificates are not going to be happy, and you'll keep losing connectivity. So we've actually just built all of these different things out And then another huge thing is this idea of installations. And we had talked about those cluster-wide installations, but certain things actually do require an input. It's not something that I can just template out and they're going to be done through a cluster resource set automatically. For every cluster install Kyverno, well, I don't need any special information there. But if I actually did here, actually, check out. And we look here just as an example at this install Tanzu software option that we have. You can see basically what we're doing here is we're defining a function in YTT of saying, hey, we're creating a service account in a cluster role binding, and then we're creating a job that's using a image that the Docker file is in the repository as well to build it, and then running a script to basically install the Tanzu software. The reason we're using a container image is where we actually have Tanzu CLI bundled in there in order to run like Tanzu package install and things like that. And then we're actually a lot of data values. It's a pretty ugly file. But in the end, what the user would provide is this enable Tanzu software auto install in their cluster, and they would click select. And then if they were to do that, what becomes really cool from that point on is we have this default values file, and they could give any of these values and accordingly will install software. So this would be install cert manager, yes or no. Installing contour external DNS, great. What's your DNS server and your DNS zone? Installing Prometheus and Grafana, great. What's your password and what's your FQDN? For example, another thing is the Grafana package requires me to give it a base64 encoded password. Well, because I'm running this client side and YTT has a base64 encoding library, I don't need to do that. Great, give me your password, whether it be VMware 1 exclamation point or something actually better than that. And we will base64 encode it for you and configure it accordingly. Fluent bit with the configurations, Tanzu build service.
You ever find yourself as a cluster operator gluing tools together and you're like, why is this string triple base64 encoded, right?
Oh yeah.
You know, it's like increased in length, like every time, you know, it's like.
Exactly.
No, I feel like I'm doing like a capture the flag, you know, except in reverse. It's like I'm creating a capture the flag problem. So when you have those, you know, kind of the YTT programming language with the power of Starlark available to you, you can just
exactly
just do a little bit of functional programming, you know, base64 paren, base64 paren, you know, then
exactly
you can talk in real world speak, human speak.
Exactly. Right. But like this is like all these awesome things like TanzuNet or Tanzu build service. If anyone has gone through like the 7 pages of installing Tanzu build service in the VMware documentation, so we've basically just brought that down from line 21 to line 28 here, and everything else is just according to the defaults, right? But anyone could change this because it's all scripted in the back end, right? But the nice thing is that anyone that creates a cluster now could just give these variables to the cluster in their cluster config, together with how many CPU into which vSphere environment or AWS environment in that case. And this will install Tanzu build service for you automatically at cluster creation time. So we get all these capabilities of installing Rabbit or Valero to automatically have backups. All of this can be configured in very simple ways. And then we get that same management, like I configure how many CPUs and how much disk I want. I can configure how many of the Tanzu packages I want installed.
I think I'm getting so excited because it's like you're kind of showing just how much complexity is being wrapped up into this single place abstraction, right? And you can layer on top of this and customize it per cluster or per cluster type or per customer type or per app team type, or whatever your division organizationally is as a cluster administrator, as a platform creator. And I think what you're really touching on is when you are a platform administrator, like you take on the pain of complexity, right? Like you're talking about like going and learning how to install this thing. And then also you got this thing, and you have these credentials and they have to be in a different format. then I got this, oh, and then now like my manager, was talking to the team about installing this add-on because the monitoring team like wants to change their add-on. They want to use InfluxDB instead of this. And like, this is my one job, right? Like I'm the platform person. I'm like building these clusters and I got all this stuff to glue together. And you've picked up on that. Oh, I've learned this YTT thing. And YTT lets me pull together this kind of like single format that a lot of tools use, like YAML and JSON. And then I can glue it in with other tools that I like Terraform. And I can pull all of that config into layers of abstractions where the decisions that I need to make and the decisions that make sense to me, the defaults that make sense to me, I can put that into however many or however few config files we need, right? It's like if someone wants to add kubevert to a setup, like if they're watching and they're inspired by your ability to build platform off of like Tanzu Community Edition, and they're like, oh, like I can clone, Scott's repo, and then now I can just go into that YTT program and add a folder and add a value, and I can like enable kubevert, on like one Boolean value for all my AWS clusters or something, right? I'm picking up on that.
Yeah, I think that's really the strength here, right? Because we're not doing anything that's really all that complex. It's the gluing together of these things and finding YTT, cluster resource set, all these different things that we can just glue them together. And they're a great solution because they're anyways part of Tanzu Community Edition. If you're using TCE or you're using TKG, you're anyways using YTT, whether you know it or not, and you're using cluster resource sets, whether you know it or not, because Tanzu uses those. So why not utilize the same tech stack as is being used for the core of the platform for yourself when it becomes so easy then? The way that I got into this was I was just interested in how does Tanzu actually work? And this is before Community Edition came out, and I just started to break apart TKG clusters. And at some point when I started to I'm like, oh, that's cool actually how they're using that. And then I went to upstream and saw what a cluster resource set is, and then played around in the Carvel playground for YTT and started messing around with them and said, oh, well, I could actually use this for that, and I could use this for that. It can also go in the other direction. If you build your customizations this way, you can gain a lot deeper of a knowledge of how your platform is actually running underneath.
Yeah, definitely a lot of those key cluster API contributors, at some point served a stint at VMware. And we still have a ton of folks just so active in the project. So you see those first class kind of cluster API ideas, deeply integrated into VMware products and now VMware open source solutions as well. And I love that story that you have where it's like you found this by sort of reverse engineering the product, right? And I've totally been that person before where I've either been frustrated with some limitation or curious about some novel solution that was built into a product, and then I needed to dig into the source, right? Like I needed to dig into the configs and like, how does this thing actually put together? What can I learn from it? So now you have this knowledge base. Yeah.
And what's great is now that Tanzu framework is open source, we can actually see the source code also that builds those things. So it's actually fun. So that's why I was so excited when Tanzu Community Edition came out, because it really brought all these things that I was basically understanding from looking at the YTT files, but then seeing how they're actually generated and seeing all of the Go code in the back end actually just brought everything into a much clearer picture, which is really awesome to see Tanzu being developed in the open.
I think we have our first non-joke question from chat, which is that the fluffy sysop wants to know, how much of this, meaning your demo and your customizations and your Terraform and all that, could be used with vSphere with Tanzu or PKGS?
So the automated installations cannot be done. The cluster configuration changes cannot be done. Nothing that we have shown right now can be done with TKGS. There is something that we will be showing that can, but TKGS is a great system for the fact that it is, it has some great capabilities. The difficulty is because it's integrated into vSphere, it also has to be much more locked down than TKGN does from the commercial side or TCE does from the community side. And I think that that's really why I so am interested in TC and TKGM, are that they're the most open distributions of Kubernetes that exist today. Almost all distributions today of Kubernetes are based off of Cluster API, whether that be Rancher or Amazon's EKS Anywhere or Google's Anthos, are all based off Cluster API. Even OpenShift is built off of the Machine API, which is kind of a fork and a part of Cluster API itself, right? So all of these things are based off of Cluster API. That's become kind of the standard. But everyone else except for VMware have locked down and created an abstraction above that that don't allow you to access the core of Cluster API. And what VMware have done in TKGM and TCE is give you that same simple user experience, but also don't block you from creating those customizations with the core Cluster API underneath. And that's what's so strong here, because we can get the simple, you install TCE, you will get a cluster up and running and it'll be great and it will work and it will solve 90% of use cases. But what about those other 10%? And that's where these things become so strong. And that's where we can add these capabilities or gain those extra 10% and just make it tailor-made for us. I would say.
Yeah, that's always the thing that I dread. You know, as a team, building platform, maybe you have your own special tooling, you know that you've got some system that needs to pull a list from a database or something so that you can create some automated ServiceNow tickets so that some other teams, you know, KPIs look really good so that you get the political stuff out of the way so that your platform can actually work in an automated way. Now, that kind of stuff, just like a weird niche use case, right? But if you buy some software, you know, or adopt some solution that wraps all of these kind of open technologies in a pretty bow, you're kind of just hoping that it's not a leaky abstraction, right?
Yeah.
That you don't lose the power of the tools that are underneath. I think that that's what was so fun for me about finding GoVC many years ago, was because I found a way to bash script my vCenter, right? And
right.
So in this way, you know, you're kind of talking about how these open interfaces, kind of the equivalent Unixy, POSIXy standard in Kubernetes is the API machinery, and in Cluster API and in those objects. And you're saying that those interfaces are still available to be played with when you have a Tanzu Community Edition or TKGM installation.
Exactly.
Thanks for addressing that so eloquently and talking about how TKGS is different. So I guess probably for TKGS, right, you'd be more of like a GoVC user.
Yeah. It was even more, it would be running SSH through SSH. You'd be running SSH tunnels through the supervisor control plane VMs to connect to your workload to your TKC cluster VMs in order to manipulate them. It's much more complex because of the networking topology there.
You're getting compliments from the chat as well on your explanation. So awesome.
Thank you,
well,
Robert.
I don't want to stop you from diving into what are we looking at right now? This was an RBAC cluster resource set thing.
So this is again a cluster resource set, but this is again that idea of how do I integrate now with an external system? So in this case, we're actually attaching to VROps. To vRealize operations. Great tool for monitoring overall the entire SDDC of VMware, and we can monitor public clouds from there. We can also monitor Kubernetes, and its Kubernetes monitoring isn't nearly as good as things like, if we look here, I've got the automated attaching to Tanzu observability, a much better tool for monitoring Kubernetes. But VROps, what it gives me is actually a correlation from my ESXi host to the VM to its representation as a node in Kubernetes to the pods that are running on it. So I can get that from the container to the infrastructure. And with the newly released Blue Medora packages that are now part of VROps standard licensing, where we have things for like NetApp storage or Dell EMC or Cisco, we can actually map from a physical Dell server to the ESXi and all the way to the pod. And then from my pod, which is connected to a PVC, I can get all the way to the LUN and the SVM in NetApp that's sitting on, and build these graphs out, which is an amazing capability. So it has less metrics, but just that relationship graph is amazing.
Sorry, in VROps, you can still see beyond even just the virtual machine into like the actual containers that are running.
Yep. If you connect a Kubernetes cluster, if you connect the Kubernetes cluster as an endpoint.
That's what this is for. Okay, cool.
So what we're doing here is it basically pulls from cAdvisor. So we're installing cAdvisor and then running an API call against VROps in a container in a job saying, hey, attach this cluster. It's a few API calls to validate the certificates because they're self-signed and, back and forth API calls. And basically that's just in a very simple script that goes and automatically we're installed.
And there's also then like the connection from the hosts to the containers underneath, right?
Is automatic.
The SXI hosts to the containers underneath. That totally makes sense. But you're also saying that this VROps attachment, it can know about PVCs and tie that back to the hardware.
Yep.
Interesting. So then you could be like as a vSphere admin or as a security person who's interested in, a spike of CPU and storage access, at an unusual time of day. Something like you could go and see like, oh, that workload when we were being attacked, was actually, it's experiencing higher IOPS on this PVC that had like, P2 data or something.
Exactly. Right. So that's what's really awesome here. That we can actually do these, full, just the entire stack in a single tool.
We're getting some suggestions from chat. That'd be awesome if there was a session at some point for that sort of end-to-end monitoring with VROps. As like as another separate demo on its own thing. That'd be super cool to watch.
Definitely, yeah, for sure. And the other one that is huge, and this is the most complex YTT that I have built myself. Well, around TC, I built a more complex one elsewhere, but around TC, this is the most complex one. Is this actually came from a requirement from a customer once in TKG of I need to have nodes that are going to be of different sizes on different networks with different labels in my cluster. I can't just have all of my nodes with the same size. And if we look at the way this is done currently in Tanzu, is until TC came out. So right before TC came out, TKG 1.4 came out. But in TKG 1.3, the answer was, yeah, you have one type of node and enjoy. In TKG 1.4, and then accordingly in TCE, we have this ability to add a node pool later on to a cluster. But that's a day 2 action. And almost all of the settings have to be identical to the original node pool. There's only a few settings that are exposed to you to change. And it's a great move in the right direction of this, let's call it, heterogeneous clusters.
And that's because it's like done either via the CLI or the GUI, right?
Exactly. It's done
so it's
only
like you don't
have
CLI. Like the full, okay. I think I see where you're going with this.
So we created a YTT template that allows me to create at cluster creation time multiple machine deployments. And just to show what this type of file looks like, there's a bit of YTT here. All the gray is comments. There's a lot, but this is very pluggable. And what we basically did was the top part doesn't really matter. We're just pulling in the TKG libraries from Starlark library files. But once that's done, where things actually become interesting here are we say that if the cluster plan is multi-machine deployment, so a machine deployment is the representation of a type of worker node in Kubernetes. So basically that's what we have here. We say if that's the case, so for basically run a for loop here of from everything in the additional machine deployment count. So someone gives me additional machine deployment count is 4. So I know there's going to be 5 because by default there's 1. So he just gives me that additional machine deployment count. And then we start to actually just print out additional YAML objects of great, create a machine deployment, create a vSphere machine template, and create a kubeadm config template, because those are the 3 objects that I need for worker nodes in cluster API. How do I know that? Because I did a dry run of TKG. I saw what it generates and basically took those YAML files, put them here, and then just parameterized everything. And where the real strength here actually is, though, I think is in a line like this, where we have this capability of setting autoscaler, cluster autoscaler in TKG and TCE. And so, for example, we're doing if the cluster role is workload and they've set enable autoscaler and the provider type is not vSphere or Tanzu because TKGS does not support cluster autoscaler. If that's the case, then we're going to add these annotations of the cluster autoscaler minimum size and maximum size that it can go to. So that's all pretty standard. But then what we have is actually this defaulting mechanism of just because I'm adding the capability for you to configure anything you want on these machine deployments. You want to set them on a different network, a different template, a different resource pool, a different OS, whatever you want to set differently, you can. But I don't want to make you give me those values. So the way that we do this is we say, great, so we're going to set this value to autoscaler min size underscore 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever iteration I'm in my for loop right now. So great, I want autoscaler min size 2 for machine deployment 2. It's that simple. But if that doesn't exist, then okay, do I have a value of worker machine count 2? I don't have that either. Great. So we're going to use the default worker machine count because that was configured. That has to be configured in order for me to work. For TCE to work, I need that value set. So we can set
like
these
defaults and
default
overrides.
things,
Yep.
defaulting all the way back. And that's done throughout this entire file here. So that all of these values, if you give them, that's great. If not, we'll default back to what machine deployment 0 is actually going to be configured with. In that
And it's
same
all
TC.
this is in a for loop
Exactly.
on a YAML struct, right? So that like you're kind of templating with the index number, the number of additional things that you have. And then the values for configuring different pool sizes for each pool that you specify is just optional.
Exactly. Right.
Also,
and
it's very clear, just everyone watching live on the stream and in the future, the message to the future is that Scott has clearly seen the light of YTT already. But if you are horrified by Starlark programming inside of YAML comments, there are a lot of good examples, and there's a syntax highlighter extension available for Vim
and for VS Code.
VS Code and all that. So I usually try to save my star YAMLs as like star.yaml, and I have a different highlighter for it.
Exactly.
But yeah, like all of those for loops and stuff, it's totally bolt on. You just start with a regular YAML. Then you're like, oh, what if instead of having one of those structs, I had like a YAML list that was built from a for loop that had, the ability to loop over things. And you'll notice it's not string templating as well, right? Again, it's like we've both seen the YTT light. We've done YTT on the show several times, but this is totally the opposite of like a Helm template. It's totally structured. It makes sense. The indentation is not as important. So go try it out, or clone Scott's repo and run a YTT build on all these things because it's super fast.
Yeah. And
cool.
So like the one other addition I added here was node labels. We can't set node labels in TCE. That is one thing that is really annoying. Is that what if I want to set labels on my nodes automatically? So I could do node selectors. If I have multiple machine deployments, I need that, because otherwise, why would I have multiple types of machines if I can't target those specific types of machines? So we have the ability to set kubelet extra args again. This is just looking at cluster API and bringing, okay, so this is how you would set it in cluster API. Great. So now let's customize that here. And so we allow anyone to set vSphere worker label 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and accordingly we'll set the appropriate machine deployment label on all of those nodes. If they didn't give me one, so I created a custom one called cluster API machine deployment and give me the name of the machine deployment that I just created. So we
I
could do
can
that.
only imagine how much research, how many different use cases, how much pain you've gone through to build up this knowledge, right? And like the fact that you could then have a little bit of additional discipline and the flexibility to express your ideas as abstractions inside of these YTT programs, right? Instead of ending up with a bunch of, probably hundreds of times more lines of YAML specific to a particular customer's needs, right? Like you're able to pull these things in conditionally and say, hey, now when I build a cluster, I have an extended version of the TCE config, right? Or extended version of the TKG config, and I can just add these values, right? That's kind of where you have gotten to.
Yeah, and I think the key...
follow-up question. Say you were in the bad scenario, right, where you were not using YTT for this, and you were not extending open interfaces that are found inside of the distribution or inside of the product. How many more lines of YAML do you think you would have if you couldn't build the program to abstract the YAML like this?
So just in this specific use case, by this customer, we had to have 4 machine deployments where this was originally created for. So if I look back into here and look, okay, the amount of lines here, okay, there's about 2 or 3 lines that are only comments, but from line 23 down to line 110. So that's what, around 80, let's say 75 lines of YAML for a single machine deployment. Times that by how many machine deployments you need to add, that's how much additional YAML I would have needed. And the real benefit here, and this is where I think that like the idea of partners and ecosystem and community becomes so important, is the idea that yes, building this once, if you were just the customer, right, you're only dealing with your environment and you're dealing with a proprietary software and there's no real community around it. Well, so you're going to build this. It's going to be a pain to build, but okay, you've solved your issue. But there's a question there, how many clusters you're creating, and does this really save me that much time? The benefit is that I have yet to write a YTT template that I couldn't just put up on GitHub and be useful for any environment.
Right, because the secrets come from somewhere else, right? It's like there's nothing proprietary in there unless you're just trying to spin up clusters better than everyone else and keep it for yourself.
Right. So if I bring this up, when I created this can now work for anyone with TKGM or TCE. It is the exact same YAML for both, right? Any customer that wants multi-machine deployment with TKGM or TCE, until some change happens and these base manifests need to change, right? If we move to, let's say, V1 beta 1 of Cluster API, hopefully soon, because framework has already moved there. Hopefully in the next release or one of the new releases will move there. And then, yeah, this will need to be changed because the API version I'm using is Cluster API V1 Alpha 3. Okay, but anyways, I would have had to change my single manifest there. And I don't need to change all this logic. That stays the same. I just change the parts that
change the fields that changed in the new API version. That's the whole point of that, right? Yeah,
exactly. Right.
And so it's greppable really inside of your repo. And
exactly,
if you have like 10 clusters instead of 1 cluster, right? It's not just the 1 to 4 YAML conversion for your 4 machine deployments, right? But your second cluster has 10 machine deployments, and your third cluster has 2, right? Exactly. And then, so it's like now you're starting to get like n times m numbers of like YAML, extra YAML lines.
Exactly.
Right? And instead, you can base all of those cluster deployments off of your one YAML project, right? Your YTT project that encodes your own opinions and builds your own extensions on top of what's available as both an open distribution and as a product. So, no,
and again, I would say also
coming in and he's saying, if I were to do any new TKGM deployment with a customer, I'd be very tempted to add this stuff to the deployment and document day 2 operations around using this, meaning this repository, this YTT program, right? So exactly to your point, it's like you've built this in the open ecosystem and someone else can use it on top of open things.
Exactly. And that's, I think, that's why I'm so excited about where Tanzu Community Edition is going to go and how it's going to grow, because being out in the open just allows that extra place for the community to come and put these things out and to help one another, right?
Mhm.
That's where I come from, the VRA world. VRA is a very closed community. We're a limited breed of people that like to deal with VRA in the real deep parts of it. And coming into the Kubernetes world was so amazing to see this just open community and how everyone's there to help. And you go into the Kubernetes Slack in any channel that you want,
Mhm.
you go in there and everyone is so open. And having
Absolutely.
Tanzu in the open as well is just a great thing to see, because
It reminds me of like the Puppet community, but less sarcastic and pessimistic.
yeah,
Right? Like the Puppet community was everything awesome about what you described about the Kubernetes community, except like probably less welcoming to people who don't have a beard, right?
yeah.
But
Right.
and so and that's not a knock on the Puppet community. Things have changed since that time. But yeah, I mean, there's something really special about cloud native.
Is there still a Puppet community?
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, the Puppet community, there's a
haven't seen
large
Puppet in
number
years.
of Puppet nodes. So
I haven't seen Puppet in years. Yeah.
yeah,
But-
and you are using Ansible for that for this jump box, right? So that
Exactly.
just goes to show. You know what? We'll just swap out everything I said about Puppet, but for Ansible.
Exactly. I was thinking of, moving it over to using Salt Stack, but instead I decided to use Ansible.
That's how you know you're still a
exactly.
hipster. When you take in
Exactly.
your existing working solutions and you're like, oh, maybe I should move it to that instead.
Exactly. But here we can see also, by the way, before when we were looking, everything looked a bit, messed up. But like when we look at YTT this way, I think it's actually really visible as well. Writing it can be a learning curve, but in terms of understanding what's going on, it's a relatively very easy thing to look at. Unlike if anyone's looked at a Helm chart and tried to understand Go templating, if there's a for loop or an if in there, I wish you luck. I can't succeed in understanding Go templating.
Yeah, especially for these sorts of one-liners, I would say that the Pythonic syntax is probably more widely understood versus the very kind of like functional syntax that's found in Go templating. It can be really hard to figure out like argument orders and stuff for those nasty one-liners.
Exactly.
Also, like things like a multi-line syntax, I think I wish I would see more YTT examples kind of breaking things out, but there are some like limitations there.
Yeah.
But
No,
just more work to improve the docs, I'd say. I do like using YTT more, I would say, than tools in a similar category like JSONet, and Q. I could try to use Q a little bit more, but I think the native experience of YTT being on YAML, which is just something that a lot of operators deeply understand, is you've spent a lot of pain learning the YAML format. Like YTT splices really nice into it.
Yeah, for sure. And by the way, this is what it looks like from the end user's perspective. This is my cluster configuration file. And so in this case, I decided to give it the discount, CPU, memory, all of that, and a label. In this case, I also decided to say, hey, change the network to be this network, and this one's going to be on this network. And if I actually looked at this cluster, which is the one I'm on right now, and did a kget no-oy, we can see that I've got nodes on 10.100, 117, on 10.100, 116, and on 119 as well. So I can actually do this on 3 different networks. I have my nodes being deployed with machine deployment 0 and machine deployment 1 and machine deployment 2. All
That's
on their
super
separate
interesting.
networks.
You could move those like VLANs to different racks, even.
Exactly.
Right, and then like CNI will just plane right over it. All the pods will be on the pod network.
Right.
Of the service subnet. You can have your upstream DNS server for kubedns, and then you're just in a very happy place as far as segmenting your nodes across different availability zones or different racks or different regions or whatever. That's really, really intelligent, right? This is the kind of stuff where it's like, nobody is going to build a better product than the interface that the practitioner decides they need, right? You know, it's like,
Exactly.
this is the stuff that I actually care about. You know, when I'm inside of the data center, you know, and I know that, you know, we've got like hands on our team that are replacing hard drives and stuff, you know, and there's a page, you know, it's the operations of like real hardware, or the cloud operations of a concerned AWS administrator, you know, that inspires interfaces like that, where it's like you got a flat file. And you chose to
Exactly.
kind of follow the format of the flat, all capitalized, like undercase, or like
The all uppercase for the
Yeah.
variables.
you followed
The
that
only
format.
reason- And I hate that format. I hate that format, but because that's the format that Tanzu uses for the variables, I
Mhm.
wanted to give the exact same user experience for these customizations.
just in
so
case
that
somebody else
from
builds
the-
something, you know, off of the assumption that you're going to have like a single depth key.
And so
basically.
that the end user experiences it as if it's a first-class citizen, as if this is built out of the system, right? I don't want someone to look at this and think, oh, this is a customization, so I have to do it differently. No, this is
Yeah, like you could have added
Tanzu
a
is
map
built
with
to be
your own
plugged.
namespace or something, you know, but it's like for someone who would want that, they could go and build that in, right?
exactly.
Because YTT doesn't restrict you from where you get your values and secrets and stuff from. Like you can pull in a secret store from like Bitwarden or Vault or 1Password. You know, you could use a crypt inside of Git, like SOPs, or you know,
Exactly.
or sealed secrets if you wanted to run your YTT at runtime. But
Yes.
all of this is also just executable in an instant on your you know workstation
machine.
laptop, on your Ultrabook.
Right.
You don't need the vCenter, you don't need, you know, a TCE cluster, you don't need some cloud machine that's super powerful to run this while Kubernetes has a controller. It's just all a program that's running on your machine client side, right?
Right. Exactly. And what
It
we
expands
can see
into
here,
your
actually,
20,000 lines of YAML that you hold so dearly.
exactly. The other one we didn't look at is that I actually created a YTT to install cube apps. And
Nice,
the reason that this is so big is that actually these aren't Helm charts. These are Carvel packages. The awesomeness of Antonio and the team who have built Carvel package support into cube apps.
Oh, no
So now we
way.
get a we get
No
a
way. I didn't
UI
know that.
support where I can come here and I can do
Really
a
new,
deploy.
like-
Is this going into
And-
Artifact Hub as well?
No, this is just pulling from the package repositories locally within my cluster.
Yeah, because if they have it in kube apps, then this might be going upstream to the you know, the
hope
centralized
so.
Artifact Hub.
So I can say the version I have right now, which is the latest released version, is limiting. But the new version that will be coming out hopefully pretty soon. The work that's been being done upstream by the team is amazing, where we're going to have some really awesome capabilities around Carvel packages. And the reason that this became so interesting for me, and this is the last thing I wanted to show today, was the idea that, you know, kube apps is amazing. I love kube apps, but one of the difficulties is we have customers that are in air-gapped environments. If anyone has tried to bring a Helm chart into an air-gapped environment, I feel bad for you. It's not easy, because how do you figure out which images it's pointing to? And then you need to go and actually pull down those images, somehow get them onto a disk on key or whatever, bring that over onto some thumb drive, bring that over into the environment, upload those into a different place, download the Helm chart, bring it over, update the value. It becomes a complete mess. And so what I've actually built here is a package repository that I basically have a tool that we'll go into another time on how to convert any Helm chart into a package. But basically what I've done is taken the entire Helm repository of Bitnami and put it into a package repository. I've converted them into packages. The benefit of that is because we're using kbuild, I can automatically relocate all of the images in that Helm chart to an offline environment in a single tar file that I bring over and then upload that, and I have my packages. And now that kube apps supports this, I also have a UI to do that. So we can really bring kube apps to an air-gapped environment with like a single
Ah.
command.
You can import the repo as a tarball inside of Kubernetes itself.
So
then
you
it
just
will
push
upload
that
it to the
in.
OCI.
So you take that tarball, just do an image package push to your registry,
Yeah, from the
and just
command
do
line.
a Tanzu package repository add. Once that package repository is in your cluster, Kubeapps visualizes
Very nice.
Right.
Very nice.
So
That
if-
is a really nice import story for
right?
for
So if I were
anybody's
to
repo, even if it wasn't air gapped, right?
exactly like this is not air gapped how I set this up right now. I have a
Yeah.
package repository, and if I just did a K apply -F to package repository -N Tanzu package repo global, and just created the package repository for Bitnami, right? This is just located in my local registry for Bitnami packages. Basically, if I did a -A, this is going to take some time to reconcile, but basically this creates, I created in this package repository this morning, the last 10 versions of every Helm chart from Bitnami, which is 96 Helm charts today. So that's 960 packages in your cluster that you could install freely. If you would like, anyone can take this. It's up on GHCR as well. And you get 960 packages that are based off of the entire Bitnami tool set. And the benefit of that is that I could do a Tanzu package available list once this reconciles, and I'll see WordPress come up here, and I'll see Zookeeper, and these are just the Tanzu ones because it hasn't reconciled yet. But once this reconciles, we'll actually be able to see that I actually created them with a special name also, because this tool that I use lets me put in a suffix for my packages. So instead of community Tanzu VMware.com, we have tanzutuesday.demo.
Ooh.
So we have like Apache.Tanzu Tuesday. And all
Might
these
take a
different
while
packages.
to clone, right?
It takes
Well-
about 3 minutes. Yeah.
Yeah.
We're getting a lot of positive attention from the chat right now. Smart Son said Scott saved the best for last. And Pivotal John has a mind blown emoji. The fluffy sysop says this is so useful. I'm seeing more customers that air gap image pooling by default due purely to security concerns. The assumption that you can freely pull anything off the internet has to stop. It's just not true for many enterprises.
Yeah. Yeah, it's completely true. It's, really a difficult thing that, we're dealing with today, especially now that like things like cosign and all these, signatures are becoming so big. If we don't bring them into our environment, it becomes much more difficult. We want to have this shift left. We want to make sure that we have everything signed. Anyone that used Notary V1, I'm sorry. It was not a good implementation, but cosign is. So is Notary V2, hopefully, when it becomes big.
Very Let's Encrypt style implementation with cosign.
Exactly.
Loves
if we
talking to
wanna
the
do
6
that-
people at KubeCon. The very bright folks about user experience. And also just really cool names for the components as well. If you haven't checked out cosign and you are a practitioner running Kubernetes or even just anything Docker image related, definitely check it out and add some signatures, and then append it to the public certificate chain. Then everyone can see that your image is yours. So.
There we go. And it's still reconciling, but we can do a Tanzu package available list.
Yeah.
If I go and run this right now.
kubevip. Yeah, we're gonna need kubevip
like?
for our bare metal Kubernetes, right?
Would you like metallb.tanzutuesday.demo, or would you like MediaWiki, Tanzu Tuesday, whatever you would like here. You could also have Apache at, Tanzu Tuesday or Grafana operator.
We got console. So all of our nodes can gossip about their key value pairs using Surf.
Exactly. Well, and what
best of breed
this
tools
is so strong. And again, we're using a Bitnami tool here called the README generator in the back end for building these packages. But if I were to do just a Tanzu package available list for console, just as an example, and we can see I've got 10 versions here, the last 10 versions of the Bitnami Helm chart. And I just did this here. And anyone that has used Tanzu and packages knows that we have this Tanzu package available. Get to the package name / the package version, and -- values schema gives me what values I could input. So we've took the descriptions from the YAML files of the values YAML for the Helm charts and actually given you it generated the Open API v3 schema so that every Helm chart automatically is documented fully as an Open API v3 schema that I could pass into the package as well, with defaults, with everything. And if people wondered at the beginning why I said a script to generate a defaults values file is important, if anyone wants to go and try and take these keys that may be 4 or 5 layers deep and build a YAML off of this, you can, if there's 2 values that you want to set or 3 values, but this becomes very difficult when you actually have a lot of values that you want to manipulate. And that's where the script that I created of, if I were just to run that script right now and did a cd to TCE customizations and TCE helper scripts, and this was get package default values. And all we need to pass to that is we've done it basically the same way as it's done through the UI. So we pass it here -p for the package and -v for the version, and then -f where I want this to be saved. So let's just call this values.yaml. Hold on. That's, yeah, cd root. And now that'll work. Permission issues there. Great. And if I did now a VI to my values YAML, oh, that just broke there. Hold on. I love demo gods. What did I just break here?
I knew it. Things have been way too smooth.
I know this is
Up.
this is like really sad right now because it was working.
The amount of hype that you're getting from fellow practitioners in the Twitch chat is definitely a little bit unprecedented. I mean, it is very much the case. You're presenting 4-dimensional solutions with 2-dimensional interfaces. You know, like this is some real Tanzu chess being played right here.
This stuff is all only possible because of Tanzu. Tanzu is really awesome to be able to get this stuff done. And you know, what's great is just to be able to do this stuff out in the open also. And so, yeah,
it's not behind a paywall. You know, it's
exactly.
Yeah. I mean, this is knowledge. This is innovation. It's out. It's freely available. You know,
exactly.
It's just the right way to do things, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And the business model for anyone wondering is, of course, that it's just if everyone does it the good way and the right way, of course, there's going to be some people who need to pay for support, right?
And the truth of the matter is that 0 of the automations that we have here are locked into TCE. Every single one of these YTT templates, every single one of these scripts, every single one of these packages work on TCE and on TKG. And what we're seeing a lot starting these days that like in development environments or whatever, people will use TCE, and then in their production environment, they're going to use TKG because there they really need the support. But for that local development of someone where he just wants to quickly go and iterate and test things out, TCE is the perfect solution for that. And you can start out there, then move later to TKG, but your investment then in the tooling can stay the same across both places. And that's where the strength.
It grows with you into production. Right?
Exactly.
Isn't that what we all want as developers? You know, something that can run with us, that we can learn about, and then we can take it to solve real problems.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. Awesome. Well, that's basically what I wanted to show today. There's a bunch more stuff, but if there's any questions.
Oh, you don't have another universe to show us? You're
I
CD into a different directory, you know, and then
I've got a lot more directories we didn't go into. But
I think it seems like we're only about an hour and 25 minutes in, and you said we still have like what, another 5.5 hours of content.
I'm more than happy to stay around and show things. I'm conscious of people's time.
No, yeah, I think everybody has been super engaged. I think I can speak for all of us, being so thankful for you to share all of these innovative tools that you've clearly put tons of time, attention, and suffering to build.
Passion. Yeah.
Passion is a good word for it. Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's listen, when you have technology like this that allows places to plug in, that's what makes me passionate about it, that it's not a locked system. And it's a challenge, right? YTT is a challenge at the beginning. And that was the first thing that I had to learn and really mess around with. And then Cluster API above that is a whole challenge in and of itself. And all of these things are, challenges being built one on top of the other. But it really becomes interesting. And especially now there's a community, the Slack on, the Kubernetes Slack for Tanzu Community Edition has been great, just seeing the interaction there, and, really excited to see what this community brings forwards.
Absolutely. And we can get more of your hours and hours of content here in a couple weeks. You're going to come back on, I believe, to talk about Tanzu application platform next.
Exactly. And by the way, I didn't show that. That's the last thing that I will show for 5 seconds here, is that I actually, if I did a kubectx right now to TCE demo tap, when I do that tap demo, it's running on Tanzu Community Edition. Not officially supported, but it works. Tap works on TCE perfectly. So we'll be talking about that and all the open source components in the next time in a few weeks.
Yeah, come back in February to join us again with Scott. Of course, we'll be here next week with another awesome guest. It's not gonna be Scott. So yeah, but thanks to everyone.
Next week's Cora.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We got
Cora's
Cora.
gonna talk about
Awesome.
Be rolling in. Remember
Mhm.
the last time we had Cora, and she was also slinging around K-build, K-pack, and
Yeah.
YTT image package, and she's gonna bring the heat, sure. So yeah, I think Smart Sun said, air gapped operators, they're gonna go nuts with your repo, and we got more love from a lot of different users. Amazing demos, got really instructive, so well explained, lots of interaction here.
Yeah.
So everyone's saying thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks to everyone in the
Awesome.
chat for
Thank
joining
you
us
all.
from wherever you are. This
Yeah.
has been another awesome Tanzu Tuesday. So
Thank
it's
you, everyone.
what, like
This was-
11:30 for you now?
Yeah, 11:28.
All right.
And you're
we're
gonna
go
do
deploy
this
some-
2 more times in the near future.
I still have like another hour and a half of work today, so all is good.
All right. Well, you always just let us know what your appetite is to join the stream, And
Awesome.
we love hanging out with you.
Permanently
Yeah,
welcome.
no, this was great. Thank you guys, and awesome being here, and we will see each other in the near future again.
Cheers, everyone.
Cheers.
Bye.
See you all next week, hopefully.